What's up? What's going down? What might be sideways? Your old pal Spicy Lad is here for, you guessed it, another Undertale and Deltarune video. Yippee! Today's topic actually comes from a suggestion from one of you fans, specifically from RandomTree7295, where they wanted me to do a video about Susie. Given what I gather from Susie, as well as what RandomTree evidently knew, it seemed like the most appropriate video to do first. But before we cover our purple dinosaur, there's another purple scaly that I thought we'd address first. Yours truly. You see, for the longest time, I've composed Sichuan's color scheme with Night Shift in mind, so they turned out more purple and pale than I had intended. So I took the liberty to do this. There we go, that's better. The colors are corrected and I redid a bunch of the sprite work for them to better fit my concept of them.
And the lower crest thingies for the feathers were too pointed upward.
So I fixed all of those, which took about a day and a half when combined with the coloration. Not to mention I had to fix both the light world and dark world versions of all the sprites. And at one point I had the light world feather color locked in, but only realized it was to scarlet instead of fuchsia, so I had to redo all that. I was so tired last night that I couldn't start writing the script until the following day, and...
The point is it's all fixed now. Okay, Susie time! Susie has been a main character in Deltarune since she was introduced in Chapter 1, and has been an unrelenting protagonist since the chapter's final act. This much is something every single person watching this is already well aware of, but what I'm focusing on here is how strangely normal Susie is. Like, she seems, at least at first glance, that she's got nothing to do with any of the deeper goings-on of the game or narrative, unlike her fellow protagonists. But it's also how she differs that makes things even stranger. Chris is forced into the player character role via the soul, and knows about the Dark Worlds ahead of time. Rose is the Prince of the Dark with many an exception about him that makes him separate from other Darkners. Noelle has her lost sister, game-breaking abilities, and angel connections, and all three of these characters appear to be linked to Gaster to some degree. And Susie is Susie. Again, on the surface, this rude monster seems to have nothing of the sort. She doesn't know anything about the Dark Worlds, or anything about Chris's soul, or having any obvious experience, connections, or knowledge on anything supernatural or meta, gastrolid or otherwise, beyond being one of the prophesized heroes. Well, that's not entirely correct. Beginning with the closest we have to normality with Susie in this context, there is Toby's 2014 pick of, in his words, original Deltarune concept art of the main characters, which presents all of Chris, Ralse, Noelle, and Susie. So that's cool that we have confirmation straight from the dog's mouth that Noelle is one of them, which some people still don't know about after all these years. Back to Susie, however, there is something else where the main characters are listed in a special way, albeit now in-game. Most of y'all probably already know about this, but I'm of course going to point this out for the people in the back. When naming either the vessel or yourself in the Goner Maker, you can assign a name belonging to a bunch of major characters in the game, though they're all exclusively residents of hometown for yet unknown reasons. Yeah, not even Ralse is on the list. If you specifically name yourself Chris, Noelle, or Susie, Gaster will say,
"You are about to meet someone very, very wonderful."
So hey, that's even more confirmation for y'all, but more importantly here is this is one Gaster thing that directly relates to Susie, albeit not particularly intimate. There's also an unused bit from the Goner Maker where instead of the interrupting voice saying their last line, it's Susie, yelling at Chris to wake up in a frenzy, along with the text effect not seen anywhere else in the game, and a typer value of 999. While this instance almost certainly isn't canon, I'd be surprised if this line from Susie never comes up in a later chapter. As a side note, the 999 typer value in conjunction with the interrupter's speaking style is also quite interesting. But I can hear you all thinking of that one other thing, and yes, it is a very important thing. Again, for the less educated among my viewers, we have to rewind things all the way back to the release of Undertale, that's right, 2015. If you got a fun value of 80 to 89 and you haven't killed too much, an NPC will appear in room 116, i.e., the hub of the waterfall neighborhood that the Blooks and Undyne live, and her name is Clam Girl, seemingly a female counterpart to Clam Guy. She's from outside of Waterfall but refuses to elaborate. She wants us to meet her neighbor's daughter, as she's Frisk's age, and that we're fated to find her, to the point where she might even be why we're talking to Clam Girl, which is what we're doing right now. Curious. She follows up on this in the true pacifist victory lap, i.e. if you didn't ignore her or kill anyone, otherwise there would be no pacifist route, reassuring that the day will come to meet this person, just not today, as this word was added in the first update, and need I remind y'all, Undertale takes place roughly in the span of a day. Oh, and the name of this neighbor's daughter? Susie, complete with quotation and highlight, but oddly misspelt, which I will circle back to. Hi, Sichuan from the future again. It turns out I forgot something rather important. In the Japanese localization, Susie's name is also spelled differently in Undertale than it is in Deltarune, so that shows that this is absolutely intentional, but it still doesn't answer our question as to why this is. So moving on. Also, in a now deleted tweet, Toby said that Susie was quote-unquote not the yellow kid. So in case you thought Susie was Monster Kid, no. So there she is, it seems. Or rather, there she isn't, as again, despite Clamgirl's insistence and textual emphasis, Susie is nowhere to be found in Undertale, nor directly mentioned anywhere else. Keyword being directly. Again, only in true pacifist, there is one thing that changes elsewhere in the underground after talking to Clamgirl about Susie. It's off in Snowdon, in a certain basement. Sans' basement. Instead of Frisk looking at Sans' binder with the group photo he has, the narrator will be surprised at something unexpectedly appearing, which in itself is alarming. It's described as a card, and on it is a poorly drawn picture of 3 smiling people, with a simple message written on it. Don't forget. For anyone familiar with Deltarune, which is probably all of you, I think the implications of this card are completely clear. Have I already mentioned a bunch of the Sans stuff before, be it what I just described or otherwise? Yes, and I will continue to do so, because a shocking amount of Undertale and Deltarune discussions, including from other content creators, just do not give this much of any attention for some reason? That's right, Half-Breed. I'm calling you on it. Moving on, jokes aside. Sans, the homesick, science-doing, multiverse-traveling, darkness-using, gastrophilating skeleton, seems to deeply cherish this low-quality illustration, which may be drawn by Susie originally for Susie, and probably depicts her. Given that the memory of the skeleton bros that pertains to their old home seems fuzzy, especially for Papyrus, Sans keeping this drawing is quite telling, more so compared to a high-quality photo. And yes, this was added in the first update, alongside Clamgirl's specification of not today for meeting Susie, as well as the fun events in general activating correctly. Although, if anyone is still somehow skeptical for some reason, there is one other very important detail about this. Exclusively in the Switch and Xbox versions of Undertale, if you have a fun value of exactly 81, seemingly nothing will change when you first meet Clamgirl, but if you revisit her after beating Azriel... Yeah, it turns out she was a goner the whole time, and was absolutely hyping up Deltarune, which came out very shortly after Undertale Switch. Really explains the Sans and Gasser connections, and the Fate stuff, and the favoritism towards curious players, and the fun event exclusivity, and the 6 in her room number. And if you're wondering, yes, Clamgirl does appear in Deltarune as of now, but only kinda. She'll seem to be standing by the beach in Chapter 2 if you didn't befriend Onion Sun in the previous chapter, but upon talking to her, she suddenly becomes Clam Guy? It's weird, and we don't know what that's about. This is currently the one and only fun event exclusive asset from Undertale within Deltarune, and it surely won't be the last. Moreover, given that Clam Guy, I guess, talks about Onion Sun, who himself talks about the song coming from the sea, which is mentioned by River Person, which may be a connection to the Dark World, and maybe the sound test. But that's neither here or there for now. Hopefully we'll get to meet Clamgirl again soon, for real, joining her fellow goners. I won't be divulging my thoughts on all this, but I think it's best to turn to something I put off a bit ago. The name discrepancy. Clamgirl spells this character S-U-Z-Y within Undertale, whereas it's S-U-S-I-E in Deltarune. You'll probably know about Deltarune being born from a fever dream of a teenage Shelby Fox back in 2011, so that means this alternate spelling must be something that got changed in development, right? Was originally Susie, but then got changed to Susie, yeah? Even with the fact that this spelling was just never updated in Undertale, with all the versions and console releases even since Deltarune, we know for absolute certain that Susie's name has always been spelled how it is in modern Deltarune. How? Toby's rough draft dialogue from 2012. Along with showing lines from Jebel and Lancer, it lets us see that many lines for Susie were also written. To be exact, Susie. This was always her spelling, throughout all of Undertale and Deltarune's development history.
But at least now, it can't get much worse.
But it did get worse.
In one of Tim Chang's own games, Dweller's Empty Path, there is a trio of one-off NPCs who are obvious parodies of Chris, Ralsei, and Susie, complete with their search for a fountain, and more importantly for us, their names. Their monikers are also like corruptions of their Deltarune counterparts. This is Chris with a Y, this is Larios, another anagram for a goat, and this is Zusi, an anagram for Susie with Z-Y instead of S-I-E. Any hoozles, what the actual fuck might this mean? I propose 2 possible answers, one being more plausible and the other more fantastical. For the former, it could be that, in canon, Susie's yet unspecified parent originally intended for her name to be spelt with a Z. Due to their daughter's rebelliousness and evident discomfort with her family, she kept the pronunciation but changed the spelling herself. As such, Clamgirl, whether she was referring to Deltarune Susie or Undertale Susie initially, this would largely hold true as, due to how she words the connection, she's much closer to Susie's parents than Susie herself, thus having a bias towards the Z spelling. This explanation is the most logical sounding of the two for a number of reasons, though it still has the oddity of Gaster himself respecting her chosen spelling, but a gunner doesn't. As for the weirder option I've come up with, maybe this Susie isn't the purple hometown monster girl we know and love, but is instead her Dark World counterpart, sharing many connections and parallels, particularly in name similarities, in other words the same thing we've observed with Ralsei and Asriel, or Spamton to Mettaton. We don't know how or why this sort of thing even happens, what it means, or what other examples will come in the future, but this Susie might be one of them, if you don't mind all the problems and complications this evidently has. Now, everything is on the table, let's finally talk about what's up with Susie. For the type of character she is, I believe she's supposed to be a foil to the other three main characters, but in different regards. She's beholden to no one's unfettered command, unlike Chris. She's very informal and uncouth, unlike Ralsei. She's not intimidated into passivity, unlike Noelle. All this among quite a few other contrasts, but not without her similarities. It's these qualities of Susie that help drive the game along. Maybe, depending on how the legend came to be, and Gaster's relation to it, it could be that Susie was perhaps selected by him to shake things up. This is under the presumption that Gaster is against the angel and or heaven, which is not a guarantee as of yet, but plausible. Maybe Noelle was supposed to be the monster in the prophecy, before being mostly replaced by Susie in the current telling of it for one reason or another. Even if the strings of control bind everyone, including Susie, she can still be something of an X-factor. An actor in the wrong place at the right time to move things in a slightly different direction. Something that the player, despite not being controlled by the game, tends to still be railroaded by. From this angle, I think this might explain Susie's confusing lack of visible Gaster connections from her perspective. She wasn't originally part of the prophecy, thus unexposed to any bizarre happenings before accompanying Chris to the closet. There's just Clamgirl, who Susie may or may not have much of a recognition for. Would be cool to eventually see where Susie lives, both for the personal lore and character development that entails, and secondarily so we can get to see Clamgirl proper. I'm aware of some stuff that would bring this interpretation down though. From here, just as I explained why Susie may not have personal relations to Gaster, it can be read as reasons for why she should, at least for a lot of them. Therefore arguable that she isn't given any special treatment, but is instead neglected, again minus the name thing. Furthermore, the player still works outside of their world, on top of whatever Gaster had or has planned for us via the vessel, to say nothing of the weird route. So yeah, not perfect, but I believe this hypothesis of mine has some merit, and should definitely be revisited once chapters 3 and 4 come out. Do let me know if there's anything else I should add to this. Outside of how Susie may play into Deltarune's story, there's also what she might mean or represent in a meta-sense. This is something that I've seen others mention here and there over the years, but in my own words, it goes as such. The main characters of the game are meant to be analogs for different types of players, or else they would be the experienced fans who want to guide others through the best route, but avoid spoiling. Noelle is the kind of player who loves things such as glitches, secrets, and theories, no surprise there. Chris is the player to engage with the absurdity but is too beholden by the rules to enjoy the game as intended. Then there's Susie, who may represent casual players who don't have any strong connection to the game and don't quite grasp what's going on with it yet. If this is the intention of Mr. Fox, then I find this makes Susie even more endearing. As people who are huge fans of fictional work or just a topic in general, it is easy and admittedly amusing to poke fun at casual players for not getting stuff like we do, but this potential avenue for representation would put them in a good light, starting with little care or comprehension and slowly working up to being immersed and curious about what they're playing. This goes for small things like befriending Lightners and Darkners alike, and working up to eagerly jumping into and closing dark worlds, most strikingly growing suspicious of secret bosses and their business. I imagine with bated breath how this will progress and eventually culminate. For anything specific that I think would happen to or from Susie, I could think of a few things. She doesn't appear to really get that Darkners are their Lightworld objects yet, or that they're by some metric less real than her, so once she's made aware of this, I reckon she wouldn't take it very well, especially with her frankly shitty home life, as well as what that may mean for her relationship with Ralsei, Lancer, etc. She might have an arc in the future where she becomes despondent or destructive, maybe even more so than what she started with. Or perhaps she'd be the opposite, acknowledging the info she's learned, but refusing to disregard the Dark World or its inhabitants as lesser than her, even if that might technically be the case, though that could also have a bit of resistance from her. But what happens if we go further? How would she react to something like the depths, or the probable truth that even the light world, including herself, is also fictional? What about learning that the human she's befriended was not entirely their own person? Would Susie rebel from the notion even then, forcing herself to stay immersed, or would she succumb to an existential crisis? That is just for the normal route. The weird route would likely be even more severe for her. By the late game, we'd have caused the deaths and otherwise harm of many people, Darkners and Lightners alike, all through the player dictating the actions of her friends. Would Susie be the last line of defense against whatever horrific detour we're taking the narrative to, using her rebelliousness and lack of controllability to her damnedest, or will she too be subsumed into being our pawn for exercising our freedom? I am fearful. I am intrigued. And of course, there are the things I'm more narratively positive about for Susie. With the Don't Forget drawing among the other hints in both games, it's all but guaranteed that Sans, and hopefully Papyrus, will have some sort of major role to play in Deltarune. He'll grow close to the Fun Gang, have something to do with the Dark Worlds and whatever our decrepit host is up to. By the end of it, the drawing will be made, kept in memory of his rambunctious teenage friends, then travel to the Undertale universe where he and his brother inevitably get stuck in. We don't know what circumstances will lead to all this, but definitely something for much later. If It's Raining Somewhere Else gets reused or reprised in Deltarune, I might just start crying from that. What do y'all think? Have I done a good job articulating what I think about Susie? Do my points and explanations make sense? Are there any other developments you want from our purple dinosaur that I didn't mention? Please let me know. Now, why don't you make like a goner and follow me? Please subscribe! Moreover, I have a Discord server with the invite down in the description. And don't forget to have a good free ham sandwich day. We'll be seeing each other again soon.